Welcome to Order Militaris Radio TV, and we're lifelong Catholics. And what we do is all for free, and for the love of Jesus Christ, and for our Holy Mother, the Church, and we'll defend our Holy Mother, the Church. So in our last episode with Brother Alexis Pinello on the real Jack Ryan, we learn about Randy, Jack's son, being taken almost prisoner in a hospital in Michigan because they find cysts and they think it's tuberculosis or something else.
Mhm.
So we're back with Brother Alexis and on this. So welcome, brother.
Thank you, AJ, having me back. And yeah, I only have a hunch, so I don't know much of Jack's life, but this is the hunch I have, is that they really wanted to recruit him into OSS, which was Skull and Bones, and that's why they called him down to Miami. But when they found out this guy had a conscience and he was a practicing Catholic, which is odious to the Freemasons, they screwed up his military career, sent him to that base in West Texas, and got him very dissatisfied. Then his only workplace conveniently burnt down. And then he starts working for the FBI, but he's still not doing what they want him to do. So they need him somehow to get him to Michigan State because they're going to run an op out of Michigan State under the cover OPS, the Office of Public Service, and they need him in Michigan State. So how do you get him there? Well, you give his son tuberculosis, or you give a false diagnosis, tell the doctor to falsely diagnose his son as tuberculosis, so you can basically kidnap him for 9 months and put him in a hospital with other sick kids. Thankfully, he didn't get sick or die. But of course, this hunch would be considered a conspiracy theory. But it is strange how circumstances, a lot of circumstances, all work together to get Jack working for these people who didn't agree with his morals, and are most likely, as you'll see in our final episode, the ones who murdered him. So
Yeah.
that's just my hunch, but we know from other facts that they already had technology to give people diseases and cancers. The girlfriend of Oswald said that she developed a way of giving people cancer by injections. Jack Randy died of leukemia after getting injection. And so it's not outside the realm of possibility that they would do something like that. So
Yeah, so the pay at Michigan State was good. Jack started at $6,300 a year, and the job appeared to bring stability, but still, it's a puzzling decision by someone with his background during the height of the Cold War. While there's no evidence that he was recruited by the CIA to his teaching post at Michigan State, a 1952 agency memo outlined salaries needed to attract younger men able but lacking reputations in their fields for undefined teaching roles at the school. The school hired Jack a year later at about the same amount proposed in the CIA memo.
mhm. Okay, so how significant is this? It's hard to tell because a lot of people in government service got similar pay. And the OPS actually wasn't a security apparatus under the president, but was being controlled by the CIA. So it doesn't mean he worked for the CIA directly, or even he even knew he was. And we'll detail facts in the final episode that shows that he probably didn't have the foggiest idea that that's who he was really in charge of him. But it is an important historical fact. I'm glad the author dug that up and put it in his book. So it will be a point to investigate for future investigators.
Yeah. A Lansing State Journal, a story about him leaving the FBI said, he welcomed the more regular working hours of a college professor, which allow him more evenings and holidays with his wife, Bonnie, and his 9-year-old son, Randy. But regular hours didn't necessarily mean shorter hours, and even his time at home was occasionally work related. He brought students to the family's house for demonstrations of crime scene searches. Jack was finishing his first year at the Michigan State University State campus in East Lansing in the spring of 1954, as the school was about to make a momentous decision to expand its reach to Vietnam.
Yeah, what are the odds of that? So, I thought this is one of the most surprising parts in the life of Jack. What does a Michigan university have anything to do with Vietnam? I mean, in the 50s, Michigan's now full of foreigners, but it wasn't that way in the 50s.
Yeah.
And if you wanted people who were fluent in French, you wouldn't really go to Michigan, I think. You'd go to some of the states that border Quebec. There were lots of French speakers in New Hampshire, Vermont, New York, Maine, and Massachusetts. So much so that there's French Catholic churches all over those three states.
Yeah.
So it is kind of unusual. And then it's also really, how is it that Jack ended up at that university? So
So at the same time, France's colonial empire had come to an end in Southeast Asia. A desire for independence showed ignited after World War II, and France's 7-year war against communist Viet Minh ended in defeat in the Battle of Dien Bien Phu. It was up to a peace conference in Geneva, Switzerland, in the summer of 1954 to divide Incho into separate nations of Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. The negotiations led to the further division of Vietnam into two separate states, split by the 17th Parallel North. The northern part was headed by the Viet Minh under Ho Chi Minh, a CIA agent, and the southern part by former Emperor Bao Dao as figurehead, with Diem serving as prime minister. The goal was to eventually have an election to unite the North and the South under one government. President Dwight D. Eisenhower wrote to Diem, promising to help him again maintain a strong, viable state capable of resisting outside aggression. Eisenhower saw Vietnam as a domino whose fall would result in the spread of communism to other Asian nations. Diem faced a daunting task, and he turned to someone in the United States he felt could help him, Wesley R. Fischel, an assistant professor of political science at Michigan State. The two had met in post-war Japan while Fischel was visiting and Diem was in exile for opposing French rule in Indochina. The relationship continued in years afterward, and Fischel had introduced Diem to influential Americans, many of them Catholics like Diem. The Catholic connection made him attractive to such notables as Massachusetts Senator John F. Kennedy and World War II intelligence chief William Wild Bill Donovan.
okay, so I have to comment on this. Where it says Donovan wasn't Catholic; he was Skull and Bones, CIA, one of the most nefarious characters in American modern history. And you wonder how Fischel was doing in Japan. Just happened to meet this guy. Sounds like he's a CIA at least asset.
Yeah.
Diem was a Catholic, and he was a devout Catholic. His manner of governance wasn't really Catholic in all his ways. He was kind of on the side of excessive government power and stuff. But it's a very interesting thing. But geopolitically, Vietnam isn't what that narrative points out as. Okay, so we have to understand that the whole Cold War was a game created by the Rothschilds of Pilgrim Society and Skull and Bones to continue their increasing control and domination of the economy worldwide. They needed a Cold War because they needed to justify constant military spending, constant, you think the enemy is over there when the enemy is really in the lodge in your own town. And so that you're not aware of their increasing penetration of your democratic institutions in your own country's government, so they can subordinate everyone and go for absolute total one world government, which has always been their goal. So AJ, you got one of the books there?
Yeah, by Anthony Sutton, it really exposes everything about the Vietnam War and everything else.
Okay, military aid to the Soviet Union, national suicide. Yeah, so he points out how the war was actually helping Ford make money in Russia. So what was the threat, the real threat of South Vietnam? Why was Vietnam become the center of the Cold War activity? Because, if there's a Cold War between Russia and China, the war should be in Russia or China, right? It shouldn't be somewhere else. But they chose the only state on the Asian mainland that had a Catholic government and a sizable Catholic minority.
Mhm.
And the French might have messed up a lot of things, but the French was a Masonic government. But Catholicism was very attractive because of the religious traditions of the Vietnamese. Even today, Laos, there's like, I think something like a sixth or a third of Laos is Catholic. They're converting like in droves, and Vietnam too. So what the Masons hate most is the Catholic Church. And they've always considered Philippines a threat. That's why in the Spanish-American War, they made a point to conquer the Philippines and install a Masonic government. And even when MacArthur came there, he found the entire government in the Philippines run by Masons. So I think you want to make a comment that if you want to comment on that. So.
Yeah, so our previous program, when we were just telling what Jack saw in occupied France, one of the grifters of fake Catholic media put a comment there saying, "How can you say in your opening, for our love of Jesus Christ, for our Holy Mother in the Church, and will defend Holy Mother in the Church, and then going to do programs on MacArthur?" Well, MacArthur at the time was retired. He's been in military for a long time, seen enough war. But he came out of retirement to help. Well, he lives in he lived in the Philippines. He loved the Philippine people. So he came out of retirement to protect those people. And they know about his military leadership. And so they asked him to prepare the defense of the Philippines. And so every member of the government of the Philippines were high master masons. So anywhere he went for a meeting, there was a meeting of master masons. Yes. So one day they pointed to him saying, "We want to make you a master mason." That's all they did. He didn't go through the rituals. He didn't say any of the words. They made him a master mason on the spot without him even like saying anything. Like what?
Yeah, so if you were assigned by the U.S. military to defend Saudi Arabia, and they wanted to make you a sheikh and give you a scarf showing you've been to Mecca, so you've never been to Mecca, because they want to say, "We're glad you're helping us, and we want to make you one of us." That's just standard. You're going to accept that and go along with it. You don't agree with it. It's just diplomacy. So, you know to say that this is like the same charge made against your ancestor George Washington. He wasn't a Mason either. It's just all the British officers were Masons, and he had to, his men had to sign him up in some lodge if he was going to get the billet to be their commander in the French and Indian War. So the Masons always try to make it look like they had more influence than they actually did, and trolls will always exploit that because what makes you a fake is the fold I have in my habits. That fold has a Masonic meaning, and therefore everything we say in the show is false because they can't address what we're going to say in the show because there's nothing you can do it. So you have to do it on some kind of, this is what I call the pygmy theory of social media. Some primitive mind has to find some superstitious reason because they're not on the rational level. They use that a lot in social media. I ask pardon of the pygmies because a pygmy is actually a tribe in Africa, and they're much more civilized than these people. So that was the geopolitical reason for moving the whole focus of the Cold War to Vietnam. So you've been programmed now that you're in a Cold War against communists, and yet you're destroying the only Catholic country in Asia that's pro-Western, But and that's why Dim goes on to get assassinated by Abe Harriman, who sent out cables while Kennedy was out of town. And Kennedy should have never tolerated that, but Kennedy took a crocodile, a skull and bones man into his administration, and those people are just total psychopaths. So They would have no qualms about giving a 9-year-old tuberculosis or killing 1 million people. It's nothing to them because they're absolute psychopaths.
So Michigan State was not alone in the field of building police administrations as the post-war years evolved in the Cold War. The U.S. Army as early as 1942 had begun planning involvement in policing after the defeat of the Axis powers, and Ed Ryan had been offered a military commission for such a role before failing his physical. He was getting up in age.
Oh, God bless him. He took the physical.
Yeah. Military work in training Germans and Japanese police succeeded in securing order and developing support to counter communist influences in the post-war years. Sure did. Right here, Operation Gladio.
Yeah, a paperclip. So the Masons will always use their dominant narratives to push their control of society and their breaking down of Western civilization or Christian civilization. The narrative, once it gets so strongly in possession of the minds of people, they don't realize what they're doing. They don't even ask questions. You know, it's like, I'm going to serve my country. And it's a sad reality. It goes on today in reverse. Now we have Russian propaganda turning Christians against Christians in Ukraine.
So the results caught the eye of the CIA, which began developing its own program for training foreign police. Michigan State was eager to assist Diem and to enhance the academic reputation, and sent a four-man mission. There we go, 4-man to Southeast Asia later in 1954. The first stop was in the Philippines, which was considered a role model for fighting communism under the direction of Colonel Edward Lansdale, who believed the key to countering the communists was to learn what the people wanted and then go about winning the battles for their hearts and minds. I heard that before.
Yeah, and that's exactly what they didn't do in South Vietnam, fortunately.
So let's see here. The Public Administration Division was to train the Corps of Civil Servants and receive fairly loose supervision from the State Department, which administered its funding. Arthur Brandstatter, chairman of Michigan State School of Police Administration and Public Safety, also was mostly given free rein for the Law Enforcement Division in Saigon, but the contract left some things unsaid. Brandstatter learned that while he could have his pick from the academic side when selecting some of the police advisors, the government would simply notify him of other appointees whom he was obliged to accept, and soon came to understand that these men would answer to the CIA rather than Michigan State.
And this is an important point to remember, that in the OPS office or in any government agency anywhere around the world run by the U.S. States government, not all the personnel are members of the agency that's the plaque on the wall. Some of them might be CIA, and some of them might be CIA assassins. And keep this thing in mind for our final episode. Keep this note in mind. It's very important.
Yeah. So the State Department learned of let's see, of the. So who's Hannah? Okay. Michigan State President Anna balked after getting a clear explanation of the terms. The State Department learned of Hannah's reservations to a review of cable traffic arranged by Byron Engel, a CIA operative directing police training efforts to the State Department's Public Safety Division. Engel, a police administrator in post-war Japan, had supervised police programs in developing nations seen as potential hotspots in the Cold War. But this was the first time a major operation would be directed by a university's overseas advisory group. He suggested that if Hannah declined the arrangement, then he and his public safety division would assume responsibility of cloaking the CIA's direction of police training within the State Department rather than Michigan State. So,
Yes, Michigan State was being funded by a government.
Yeah. But Michigan State, eager to administer the program, eventually agreed to the terms and selected Howard Hoyt, former Kalamazoo police chief, to head the school's Vietnam Law Enforcement Division, He was charged with training the organization and introduction of modern police methods with the overall goal of security. Hoyt was among the first to move to Saigon. While he answered to the school in the early days, he reported meeting daily with Lansdale CIA representative Gordon Jorgensen. And then Jack expressed interest in one of the positions in Vietnam where the French had been the language of the government administration.
Did he go down in 54? Or did he go later in 55 or 56?
You went in 54.
54. So here you see how the government money goes to the university. The university starts a project overseas through a member of their faculty just happens to know the new prime minister. And then that entire operation is infiltrated and controlled by the CIA as a front. And why would the CIA be involved in all these forming police organizations? Simple Masonic reason. If you are involved in training the police, you control the police. If you can control the police, you can get off. It's a standard practice in Freemasonry is if you commit a crime for which you could go to prison, you connect with the Mason in the police or the court, and he gets you off. So much so that if you're a Mason in England, you murder someone or homicide stuff like, unless it's after first degree, you'll get off. You won't even get prison because it's a complete Masonic system. So it's very important to the Masonic Lodge to get control of police and military forces so their men become immune. And then they can offer that to psychopaths who want to join their organization. Oh, we can get you immunity to commit any crime you want. And that fulfills their entire agenda of bringing down Western civilization and putting people in power that are total psychopaths, which is what we see now today in the world in almost every government.
Yeah, so facing reluctance at home, Jack didn't immediately commit, and Brandstatter had his own reservations, since the departure would create a teaching vacancy in East Lansing, with the fall semester fast approaching. But Hoyt ramped up the hiring pressure on Brandstatter by telling him that the U.S. government was pushing to not only add even more positions, but if the university lacked, create a separate unit that would operate independently of Michigan State. Brandstad's reservations about replacing Jack in the classroom evaporated, and Hoyt was pleased that he was being considered. With his background in French, years with the FBI, and his most recent training on staff. But Bonnie's opposition to the move grew stronger after hearing reports of riots engulfing the Majestic Hotel in Saigon, where the Michigan State personnel had been staying. A mob of mostly anti-communists protested the first anniversary of the Geneva Agreement by giving the North to the Viet Minh and targeted the Accord International Monitoring Team at the hotel. 2 people were killed and 50 injured. Brandstatter thought he lost the candidate, but Jack was undeterred, and Randy recalled his enthusiasm for the job in a family discussion. My father talked it up with me and with her. He said he thought it was prestigious. Jack thought it was especially important to have his wife with him while traveling in high social circles in Saigon. My mother was the type of woman you could put on your arm, Randy said. Very beautiful, very gracious, and she would fit into most any social structure. He was counting on her to fill a role there. It was a role Jack had seen succeed with Ed and Georgette. His family complications eventually were solved in Jack's mind. He received an appointment after assuring Michigan State that he would earn a graduate degree and get on track for tenure after he returned to the States. The responsibility of assisting the Vietnamese in the development of sound law enforcement organizations outweighed that of advanced studies to the point of absurdity, he told Brandstatter, while promising to at least begin work on research papers while in Saigon. He brushed up on his French vocabulary and began adjusting to new idioms and pronunciation in Vietnam, and later went with Bonnie and Randy for vaccinations or preparation for the trip abroad. With his focus on the opportunity overseas, he wasn't paying close enough attention to what was going on at home, nearing George tunnel vision when he enlisted during the Korean War. Jack left East Lansing, assuming that his wife and son would follow him to Vietnam, but whatever the plans had been, it was never realized. I don't remember the next time I saw my father, Mindy said. It would be years.
Okay, so since we know most of lots of members of the family are alive and they'll be listening to this program, I'm not going to comment on that, other than I will cite the fact that I admire my mom. Whenever my dad changed jobs, we moved 11 times in my childhood, so I was always with my dad, and there's only maybe just a short little absence of that, but this is one of the hardest things to do in a family is to break your social ties, but it would be heroic to go to a war zone. So that's perfectly understandable. But to all Catholic families, I say, if you can't work out your differences, agree to disagree, and don't break up the family or the marriage, because there was really no reason actually that she had to go to Vietnam. We'll say that openly, or even to put his child in danger. But there was also no reason to break up the family. And because this is only a minor temporary thing that lasts a few years, you got to think about your whole life ahead of you. And you always need one another. So this is a sad moment in Jack's life, and it probably came to him as a shock because, men in the 50s weren't really that sensitive to these kind of issues, and women were being told they could, do things that women wouldn't even thought of done years before. So.
Yeah. Jack Ryan stepped from the Pan American airliner on October 29, 1955, and into the steamy climate of Saigon, ready to hit the ground running. He brought with him 3 years in the FBI, 1 year in teaching, and a lifetime of instruction from his father, a background that emphasized structure and black and white view of the world. He carried the jock convictions into a nation of blurred lines, shifting boundaries and choices that existed only in shades of gray. As it would be expected, he is getting right into everything, Jack's boss, Howard Hoyt, wrote to Michigan State a few days after his arrival. Jack was getting into what the French in Indochina called un panier de crabes, or a basket of crabs. The observation that crabs scrambling to get out of a basket eventually become so determined to see others fail that they ignore their own efforts to succeed. The people tasked with piecing together the new nation of Vietnam could be at once compli- complimentary and backstabbing, forthcoming and secretive, generous and thieving, neglectful and overbearing. The nation created by diplomats at a table 6,000 miles away was bound to face complications, but the entanglement of better enemies and twisted alliances was beyond anyone's ability to overcome. Jack settled in while Prime Minister Nigo Diem was in the midst of consolidating power in the South, a task that would turn out to be the primary focus of his entire tenure in office. He faced natural resistance as Catholic leader of the nation that was 80% Buddhist, and rather than reach out for cooperation, he surrounded himself with other Catholics in his administration.
Yeah, I lost you there for a while, AJ. I don't know if you saw my camera freeze. Your froze for me.
Okay.
Okay, so I don't know. Did you hear my comment about the family?
Yeah.
Okay, so you got that. So maybe you didn't lose that much. We'll see on the recording. So yeah, this is what's going to cause the downfall of the Catholic government in Vietnam. There's nothing wrong with the Catholic government having Catholics in it. What's wrong with Catholics is that if you're a minority government in a country that is a different religion, you can't do things like forbid the Buddhists from having their celebrations, which are ancient and cultural. Buddhists aren't idolaters. Their religion, and according to our categories in the West, is more like a self-help psychology. And this is what's going to bring down the government eventually. That they start out. You don't legislate Christianity. So, but that was the French colonial style of absolute power, and he was probably just imitating it and thought it would work. And not to mention the fact that there's probably already a lot of personal reasons between Buddhists and Catholics that disagree in Vietnam. And the Buddhists of Vietnam think it's wrong to pray. They think it's a psychological aberration that you should think there's a God. So Buddhism has a kind of an atheistic element, which made all of Southeast Asia capable of falling to the communists quite easily. And the coldness that South Vietnamese who are Buddhists show to Christians is quite extraordinary. They can be the most friendly person, and then when they find out you're a Christian, they'll just write you off completely. I know this because I know South Vietnamese who are Buddhists. I met them in Boston, and I had that happen to me with a man who was very friendly. We were very friendly. You know, he didn't know what this was. He thought maybe it was some kind of Buddhist monk, but once he found out it was a Catholic, it was like, so, you know, the natural reaction of Catholics would also be to respond that way, but that's what's going to bring down the government. But in the meantime, they were used. They trusted, like many Catholics do, that America would save them. Even we in America have respected and trusted our government for generations. We never realized who was taking over and who was it really serving. And it's only after the scam, it's only after the recent pandemic we realize how tight a control there is over all forms of information and government activity. So we really can't blame Diem and his government for not seeing that, but they're going to be a tragedy. He's going to end up assassinated by a skull and bones man who organizes his overthrow out of Washington without any authority in the U.S. government to do that. So.
Yeah. So Jack settled into the climate in Saigon just after Diem refused to agree to the elections set out in the Geneva Accords. Diem expressed doubt that the nationwide vote would be carried out honestly in the North. Instead staged a referendum in October 1955 to depose Emperor Bao Dai and create the Republic of Vietnam in the South with Saigon as the capital and himself as president. He and his family controlled the election process so thoroughly that the final tally showed him with 98% of the votes.
Okay, so this guy was not honest. You know?
So Michigan State's own operation mirrored this bubbling stew of opposing interests and ambitions. Wisely Fischel, the unofficial figurehead for the group, had a doctorate in international relations and had taught political science. He was intensely interested in the diplomatic scene, but his career ambition was so closely tied to Diem that it clouded his judgment. Edward W. Widener, the official chief advisor for the Vietnam team, likewise was a political scientist. The Michigan State administration team concerned with refugee resettlement and civil servant training also came from the academic side. The police division came mostly from the law enforcement backgrounds and approached its work more than a practical side. The division head Hoyt had experienced the big city police and had been involved during World War II in safeguarding Gopher Ordnance Works in Minnesota, where he was acquainted with Jack's father, Ed, when he headed security for the Minneapolis police. After the war, Hoyt had trained police in Germany. Jack was an FBI veteran, while Corey Diamond was considered an expert in fingerprinting with the state police in Michigan. Other group members specialized in police record keeping, prisons, and electronic communications. And then there was George Boudreaux, who was assigned with Jack and Diamond to work with the Vietnamese Bureau of Investigation, the new name designated for the secret police. Bonduras, like Jack, spoke French fluently, but his primary training was in counterintelligence. While he appeared on the organized chart as an MSU employee heading VBI security training, he in fact answered to the CIA station and was the only known member of the early team with no connection to the school.
Okay, so there it is. And so I was wondering if the others knew that, or maybe they did know that or didn't know that. But, you know, in those days, everyone thought the CIA was an up and up honest organization. You wouldn't have had any doubts. You would be proud. And honored to meet one and have one working at your side.
Yeah.
You know,
As head of the MSU Department of Police Administration, Arthur Brandstatter faced twin headaches in trying to fill staff openings in a new operation 12,000 miles away and then keeping his people happy once they got there. Brandstatter served as the father confessor for the Michigan State, writing from Vietnam, deftly handling complaints from the other side of the world with patience and good humor. The former Michigan State All-American fullback provided a heavy dose of distraction with talk about Spartan athletics and his son's high school sport exploits. One of his weakest wheels was Jack, who complained about Chief Advisor Widener's leadership 3 weeks after arriving in Saigon. At a staff meeting, Jack pushed for stronger security, suggesting controls on wastebaskets, reassignment of the office keys, privacy measures for phone conversations, and improved security for staff members, homes, and hotels. Boudreaux of the CIA chimed in, adding that documents be labeled Michigan State's top secret as needed. Boulder, while not opposed to security, argued against a brand of government-type controls that Jack suggested based on his FBI experience. Jack referred to him dismissively as a political scientist in a letter to Brandstatter and questioned whether he was up to the job of leading the program.
okay, so here we see for the first time in this biography of Jack, his personality shows. So when it comes to professional activity, he is not one to keep his mouth shut. He only will wait 3 weeks. This is not a guy that waits, 3 months, who's only interested in getting a promotion and therefore never criticizes anyone, but goes around going, So, and mark this as an important character trait because this is something that will get you to succeed in a truly Catholic society, a true Western civilization, organized society where of meritocracy, where good, honest, upright, diligent, professional, intelligent people get promoted. But this is exactly the character trait that will get you bumped off if you're in a Masonic organization or society. They will not tolerate this because the people who get promoted are members of the lodge, whether they have qualifications or not. The only qualification they need is to be more psychopath than the next guy. And so if you're talking about problems, you're going to start pointing out all their members are being incompetent and they can't get promoted. You are enemy to their entire system. And so mark down this personality trait of Jack. It's probably heavily contributed to his death.
Yeah. So the Saigon office soon received file cabinets with locks, a burned bag for the disposal of sensitive papers, an office guard, and instructions on the use of distribution. The concerns were mostly cased after that, except for the staff's suspicions that the office outgoing mail was being read at the U.S. Embassy where the CIA station was based. In response, Michigan State University staffers occasionally used cablegrams to communicate with Brandstatter to avoid unwanted eyes. Jack liked White, his eminent supervisor, but thought he neglected communication in staff meetings, which he felt resulted in confusion among team members and some duplication of effort. This criticism echoed both his FBI training and his father's many instructions on the value of organization. But Jack checked himself after expressing his views to Brandstatter, adding, My position here is somewhat delicate, on the order of whose spy is Ryan?
Who's what?
Whose spy is Ryan's?
Oh yeah, meaning he doesn't have other information, you know. Yeah. So he's this guy is very intelligent. This is not someone who's going to get surprised by anything and or do anything untoward. You can see that Jack is real professional and real expert in his affairs and quite sensitive to what's going on.
Yeah. During a visit to the U.S. Embassy where the CIA was listed in the political sections, White told Boudreaux's superiors about his plans to use Jack in the training of the secret police. and suggested they provide him orientation. So, even with all the personal issues, the Michigan State Police team finally began to settle into its job. As Christmas 1955 drew near, the staff decided to observe the holiday, no carols, decorations, or gifts, because it would just increase the loneliness and homesickness. Jack still was alone at the holidays, but he wrote to Brandstatter that Bonnie was planning to arrive with Randy in March 1956, that her mother, Beatrice Nyben, was going to pay her own way to come along. 12,000 miles, and I can't get away. He wrote in reference to his mother-in-law.
So he had high hopes.
Mm. He spent his time away from the office working on a research paper and making field trips into the countryside. While few Michigan State advisors had ventured far from Saigon, Jack traveled about 100 miles to the southern West Province and the Mekong River Delta to study the survey in the area and deliver a lecture. He was unimpressed by what he found, noting that training involved no classroom work, only physical exercise, close order drill, and firearm practice, which consisted of firing just 5 rounds a month.
These police weren't being trained to do anything.
In January 1956, Jack completed his research paper, A Brief History of the Surete in Indochina, which detailed how the French had created the police force in the late 19th century in colonial Indochina. Its original focus was mostly on criminals, especially river pirates, with little regard to political activity. Vietnamese took only subordinate roles, even though many were better educated than the French, giving them orders. And the paper made Jack the Michigan State's group preeminent source of information on the Surete, whose renaming as the Vietnamese Bureau of Investigation was making little headway, and he was assigned to work with Boudreaux and Diamond in modernizing the unit. Jack's paper would still be cited in research more than 5 decades after it was written, but whatever triumph it represented, the same could not be said for his personal life. The months-long battle with Bonnie about coming to Saigon was over. She told him in January 1956 that she and Randy were remaining in America, and he told her that he was not leaving Vietnam. She filed for divorce that spring. Jack's surprise at her decision made it apparent that there had never been a meeting of the minds between them. As time goes by, Bonnie could well regret that she ever made the move of shoving me overboard, Jack wrote to his brother George. I did not now hold any anger toward her. She's just mixed up as usual.
Really bad sign. And Bonnie's a Catholic, so that's something Catholics didn't do. If you got you basically if you divorced in '56, you would be excommunicated in the Catholic Church, and you wouldn't be allowed back to the sacraments. It was a thing that no good Catholic would even conceive of. You know, maybe to anger someone, an argument might launch the word divorce, but you would never even conceive of it. I can't really say much on it because no one, any of my relatives on any side ever got divorced. So really sad though, and this is going to hurt Randy because Randy's not going to see his father for many years. This is precisely the years in which a boy needs his father around, at least needs to see his dad.
Yeah.
So
well, that ends our episode for today.
okay, and we've gotten up to the 56. So pretty soon we're going to run into, Jack's going to run into this murder of this Canadian diplomat, and that's unsolvable, and that's going to add a little more information to what he knows is going on. Then he gets assigned to other parts of the world, and he comes back to Vietnam. So this will be the next episode. So
Yeah.
There's a lot of lessons in this life of Jack for Catholics in professional life and Catholics working for government agencies. Modern governments are not Catholic. They're run by Masons. what's really going on, you may never find out. And if you're honest and upright, and everyone knows you're honest and upright, they're certainly not going to tell you what's really going on. And you might get your whole career destroyed, ruined, and you may be never promoted and shafted, and you'll never figure it out. And this is the reason why. Maybe in a way it's good you didn't figure it out because you felt you complied to go to the police, and well, you may not make it to the police and back, you know, because the world is a lot more corrupt than we realize. But this is why Catholics should vote for a Catholic party and not for a Masonic party, because you need a political force you're going to clean up your country and keep it honest. Against the Masonic lodges and their parties that they control, that's not going to happen. But this is a side comment, some reading through Jack's life. So highly recommend this book to any Catholic in the United States, especially, and any Catholic works in public service. And any Catholic wants to think about his career and how is it going and where it's going. It's a lot of lessons here.
Yeah, so I have it's only available on Amazon, so I have it linked on the Amazon for the United States and Amazon in United Kingdom and Europe. So please get this book. It's highly worth it. We're only giving you bits and pieces of all the information. It's packed full on George. It's packed full on Ed. Even more details about Jack's career and what he's seen, what he went through. Yeah. So please get this book, and if you're reading it, if you got it and you read it, or you're reading it with us, let us know. We want to hear those comments, not the troll comments.
Thank you for having me on Older Militaris Radio TV, AJ, for this 5th episode of the life of the real Jack Ryan.
Yep. This is Older Militaris Radio TV signing off. Deus Folk.
Deus Folk.